This is Paul Marquardt, principal of Red Hill Lutheran School, and making this video today at the request of our steering committee members who had asked for some additional information about the Iowa assessments that you should have recently received in the mail, your student's narrative profile. So I'm going to do my best here in the next few minutes to try to share some information about the Iowa assessments that we take in the fall and the spring. First off, I kind of want to be just very open and honest about that. I really feel it's important to share those scores with you as parents about our school as well as your individual child. But at the same time, I want to remind you that, again, it's just a snapshot in time of when we take an assessment, and so that can vary from one year to the next. But as we go through the information here on this video, I think you'll see that one of the important uses of this information is to try to show us as a school and hopefully help you as parents to work with students and how we can continue to raise their bar and raise their level of learning based upon the information we get back from these and how we use that information. One other thing before we get into it is I do want to talk just briefly that the Iowa's assessment test is a very well-recognized, nationally normed test. It's been around for actually in some form or another since the mid-1930s, so almost 100 years. You might have recalled a test called the ITBS, or Iowa Test of Basic Skills. That test morphed into the Iowa assessments back when the Common Core standards came out. So it's a similar test, but the Iowa assessments now test for Common Core curriculum, which has to do with more involved thinking and not just rote memory and regurgitation of information. It's a norm reference test. That means they give this test to students throughout the United States of all different socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as ethnicities, and they test it with about 250,000 students, and this test was last norm referenced in 2011. It'll probably be norm referenced again in 2017 because about every 6 years they update that information. Now let's get into some of the information. We use this test for, we do our testing 2 times. We do it once in the fall and once in the spring. That's a little bit unique for an elementary school, and it's actually a very positive thing because the reason we test in the fall is different than why we test in the spring. As you will be able to see on your screen, we test in the fall for 4 specific reasons. One is to simply identify strengths and weaknesses both of your students, each class, and the entire school. We take this information and it will inform our instruction pedagogy as we go forward through the rest of the year. Third, it informs our placement decisions, and you'll see later in this video where we have to be very intentional about how we differentiate our teaching and our practices because we have very high achieving students in certain areas and we have others who have more challenges. And it also allows us to implement different programs that are called response to intervention, where we can intervene in the learning and kind of track and see how those practices are going to affect the students' learning over the long term of the school year. The springtime, we do the testing, but we do it for a different purpose in the spring. We're able to now look back at the scores that we had from the fall, and we're able to look at growth over time. And we put some numbers to that and hope that we're going to achieve those numbers and those projections that we place on ourselves. We want to measure mastery of our core standards. We want to make comparisons between grade levels and also between different subject areas. We want to evaluate our programs and our curriculum to see what's working, what may not be working, have we tried new programs and curriculum, and how those might have affected our student outcomes in the spring. And finally, it supports accountability. There's a lot that you can find about standardized testing and the validity of it and the value of it. But when it's all said and done at the end of the day, it provides us a good benchmark that we can judge ourselves upon and hold ourselves accountable to, as well as other means. But we find it valuable, and so testing in both the fall and the spring is very helpful in this regard. So let's get into a little bit of statistics. On your screen, you should be presented with something that probably many of you have seen before in your math statistics classes and may have dreaded over that time, and it's a traditional bell curve. And of course, on a bell curve, the large center portion is going to be where most of the scores or the results are going to occur. As you get out to the two ends of the spectrum, it goes down and becomes flatter because there's much less results that occur out in those two areas. The most important thing when we talk about standardized test scores and the bell curve is that right down the middle is 50%, and that's a 50% rank, national percentile ranking. What 50% means is that if you are doing everything right and you are working hard and you are right where you're supposed to be as a student at this point in time, in this grade level, at this point in the year, you're going to be in the 50th percentile. That's super. If you are to the far side, 51, 52, 53, and you're moving that direction, that's incredible. That's actually saying that you're better than the average of all the students in your grade level at this point in time of the year. If you're to the left of that, less than 50, we want to know that, and we want to figure out why that is and what we can do to move you to that 50% or beyond that. Make sure you, and it's difficult to do, make sure you don't equate the percentile rank with 50% on a test, where a test with 10 questions, you get 5 questions right and you get 5 questions wrong, you get 50%. That's an F. You failed the test. National percentile rank, 50% means you are right where you need to be. You've got the correct number of questions right, and there's no need for alarm. The next graphic that you'll see on your screen is a very simple composite score of all of the national percentile rankings for each grade level here at Red Hill Lutheran School. We administer the Iowa assessments in grades 2 through 8 at our school. And so on the bar graph that's presented in front of you, you will see where the composite score for all of those students ranks. Again, remember that 50 percentile is the average. So anything beyond that is a very good score. As an administrator, I'm pleased that all of our students and all of our scores are beyond that rank. Would I like them all to be in the 99th percentile? Of course. And that's what we continue to strive to do. But I want to have you look at the next graphic, which is where I've just taken the bell curve and superimposed, or I've made a notch on that bell curve of where our national percentile ranks score. And if you look closely at that, you can see that we're well beyond the 50 percentile rank for all of our grades 2 through 8. And in fact, 4 of those 7 grades are in the above average national percentile ranking and are greater than 77%. I think we as a collective group of educators and parents and our community of stakeholders here should feel very good about that. But we continue to have work to do because we always want to achieve more, and we've been blessed with a lot of resources here, and so we want to use them to their fullest. The next several graphics that you'll see on your screen present longitudinal information. And this, for me as an administrator, is a very telling graphic. What we're able to do is go back and look at each grade level from the time that they first started taking this test until this last test in the fall, And it gives us different data points along the way. There's a faint line that, if you look closely at that graphic, shows you where the national norm for students at that grade level at that testing period in time should be. That very faint line, you'll notice, is ever increasing and going higher as you go across, because with each period of time from fall to spring and year over year, you're going to continue, and you should expect to see maturation and growth and learning occur. The line that I like to look at is the darker black line, because that represents the student's performance here at Red Hill Lutheran School in this grade level. Anything above that faint gray line is a good thing. That means we're above the norm, the national percentile norm. Also, if we can increase that distance between that faint gray line and the dark black line, we should feel extra good about that, because that means we're not only staying up and keeping above the norm, we're increasing the distance and the ability that our students are able to perform at. And I think mainly that happens through being conscientious about our teaching, always looking for the best curriculum, and keeping open communication with parents about things that they see, things that we see, and ways that we can partner together to make education the most robust it really should be for the students that God's placed here at Red Hill Lutheran School with us. So there's a graphic for each one of those, and you certainly can stop the video and go back and forth and look at that. You'd obviously be interested in your child's grade versus other grades, but you can take a look at all of those. There wasn't a graphic for grade 2 and grade 3 because those data points are so limited at this point in time. There really is not enough of a trend line to give us anything to look at yet. The next graphic is kind of a colorful graphic, and it's really where I like to say the rubber meets the road. Each teacher at each grade level is asked to review the national percentile rankings for each of their students in each subcategory area. And if you look at this graphic, the students' names have obviously been removed, but it's an actual analysis that was done by a teacher on the standard of the Iowa assessment, standardized scores for their class. As you go across each row, it's the same student. The columns represent all the different subcategories of the Iowa assessments that are administered. The teachers are asked to highlight those areas that are high, and you'll see those highlighted in a blue square. Thank you, Mrs. Driscoll, for that advice. And so if we take a look at this one here, you'll see that across the top we've got several blue squares that are highlighted. 99th percentile, 95th percentile, 92nd percentile. Those are amazing scores by any stretch of the imagination. But it's a challenge as a teacher to teach students that are very high, because you have to stay in front of them. You have to continue to stretch them. And so over here in the far box, the teacher is asked to provide a narrative of what are their plans to stretch that student even though they're already at such a high level. You go down here 6 rows later and you find several boxes that are yellow. And a yellow box means caution. We should be concerned. These national percentile rankings are below 50, and we want to move them up. Why are those scores low? What ability does the child have? How can we teach to their strengths? And so they make an action plan for those students as well. This is important for a teacher to think through this logically and incrementally, because as you can see in this class, you have some students with a lot of blue and you have some students with a lot of yellow. So as a teacher, you have to differentiate your teaching and challenge the high ones, but also give attention and bring along the ones at the lower end that need additional help. Differentiated teaching is something that we feel our teachers are very well versed in and do a good job here at Red Hill Lutheran School. But this data really helps provide a roadmap for them to do that. The final thing that they'll do with this is for the low scores, we'll use here, this student has a 38th percentile ranking in conventions of writing. So we're going to ask the instructor, based upon everything they know about that student, what would be a reasonable goal for that student to achieve in the spring Iowa assessment testing? Would it be 40, 42? And to write that number down. Then when the tests are done in the spring and we look at those results, we can see how well did we do based upon our projection. It gives us a target to shoot at or a goal. And we may say, well, we'd like to get that student from the 38th percentile rank to the 42nd, and we get the test back and we see it's only at 41. We've made progress, which is good, not as much as we were hoping to make. Or maybe we get the test back and it's at 43 or 44, and we think to ourselves, wow, there's a lot of things that happened here with that student that we can be proud of, and we want to share that. So these test scores will be shared again with you in the spring and continue to be shared with you every time we take them here. And I think as this practice becomes more familiar to you, you're going to become more comfortable with the terminology and the language and reading the score reports. The test score graphic that you got in the mail with a cover letter from me, doing my best to try to explain this in a narrative form, looks something like this. If you are in the 3rd, 5th, or 7th grade, you got a report that is exactly like this, which contained an area that had scores for what's called the COGAT, or the COGAT, which is a short wording for cognitive ability testing. Now, one caveat I want to make sure I'm very clear about is that the COGAT, or the cognitive ability testing, is in no way, shape, or form an IQ test and should not be looked at in that way. It simply provides us with some questions and some assessment data on what ability the child may have. When you take your COGAT data and your national percentile rankings and you look at them together, sometimes it can help you try to question or figure out maybe why scores may be where they should be or where you wish they would be. As I look at this report on this student, if I was a parent, I'd look at this and immediately, like most parents, we focus on the negative, unfortunately. There's a score here of 39 percentile. Well, that's less than 50. That means my child is not where they need to be. So how do I move them up that 11 percentile ranks? Well, the teacher's probably one of the best places to look and talk to about that. But I would also ask myself, for this example, that's in the area of computation. And I step back and I look, is my child really challenged with math computation? And if I wasn't aware of that, or that was surprising to me, I should now be aware of it. More than likely, most parents will say, yeah, they've always kind of struggled with this. And so this is an area where you want to continue to focus on. And that would be part of the plan from here on in, and you want to partner with the teacher in what are some ways that we can put together to strengthen their learning so that that computation score gets closer and closer to that 50 national percentile ranking. I started talking about the COGAT, and I want to go back to that. One of the things that the COGAT does is it takes their ability, and in this example, the quantitative ability for this student was well above the 50 percentile rank. And so when I look at that quantitative ability and that low score of math computation, it makes me say they've got the ability, but they're not performing to that level. So what's the disconnect there? These are tough questions, but they're good questions to ask. They're not easy questions to answer, however. Education is not a science. There's science involved, but it's really a lot of art and science. And this is one of the main reasons I think it's important to share this information with you as parents, so that the school, the teacher, and the parent can all work together and from the same information to try to come up with the best plan to continue to challenge each child and move them forward from where they're at today to where we'd like them to be tomorrow based upon the gifts and abilities that God's given to them. One last area I want to talk about and make you aware, we can drill down this information to individual questions throughout this test. And I'm going to show you a graphic here that shows just an example. Within a language section, there are many sub areas. And what this graphic is showing you here is, let's say, like within language, there's a section of punctuation. There were 5 questions on the test that talked about punctuation. And if you look at the graphic here, it's going to show you that this class as a whole was at the 63rd percentage. And this actually is an average percentage score. So out of those 5 questions, all right, the class as a whole got 63%. That's not very good. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the small faint line on here shows what the national norm percentage is of students who took this test. And punctuation is low for everybody nationally. Now, that's kind of a conviction on us as a country, I guess, but we know that we want to work on punctuation in a very concerted ways, in a very focused way with this grade level, because that's the lowest area. The good news is it's above the national norm, but it's still an area that we want to focus on. I share this as an example of the type of information, if you choose to dig that deep into it, is available to you, and you know, we can certainly share with you. The question is, or the test, the Iowa assessment, made up of hundreds of questions taken over a week-long time period. It's 1 week in your child's life. It's like taking a Polaroid picture of you today. And so if you thought about how you look today, how you're feeling today, and if I had somebody take a picture of you and then we blew that up on a board and we analyzed that, you'd be a little scared possibly for us to evaluate who you are as a person and everything about you based upon just that one picture. But if I took a picture of you every day for a year and we looked at that, that would probably give us a lot better picture. I always think about this in the hallway of my home. There's a picture of my children from the time they were born, and then we took one every year, and they're school pictures, and it's kind of fun to look at those pictures all the way for the last 20 years and how they've matured and how they've grown. I would never want to judge my children or anybody's children just on one snapshot and one point in time. But it is a meaningful barometer for us. The teacher is going to be one of your best areas to talk to about putting a plan together and addressing high areas as well as low areas. So I encourage you to do that. I am always here and welcome you to come in and talk with me, and we can look at this data and information. It's your data on your child, on your school. And so I thank you for your time and listening to this. I hope it was informative to you. Since it is Christmas, I do want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year. Thanks for listening.